The Sikha we will be learning is in the Kutisichas the Kochav Test, the first Sikha to Parshas Teitsei. The Parsha talks about shatnez, that you're not allowed to wear clothes that's a mixture of tzemer pishtin, which means wool and flax and linen. So the Rebbe says like this: Gleich noch dem Tzivoy of the Misa shatnez, like silba shatnez tzemer pishtin yachdav, right after the commandment in the Torah concerning the prohibition of wearing shatnez. The pasuk says, "Leisilba shatnez, do not wear shatnez," which is tzemer or pishtin, wool and flax, yachdav together. So right after that, zokt on Torah, gdilim tasalachal arbekam ksuscha gemer. So right after that, the Torah tells us, make tzitzis on the four corners of your garment. Und von dem wird die zwei Psukim stehen, bismicha zeh lezeh. And because these psukim, the posik of the Isur Shatnez and the posik of putting on tzitzis are written next to each other, len menop, so the Gemara learns out that gdilim tasa lecha afan klayim, that when you make tzitzis, you could even make it with shatnez. That's klayim, zayin mutter betzitzis. Klayim, which is another word for shatnez, is allowed when it comes to tzitzis. Al derech zeh gefindt man meheter von klayim by the big dekune. We also find that you're allowed to wear shatnez, klayim, by the garments of the Kohanim. Zwischen der Big Hunde, was Kohanim trocken bei Vidos und bei Migdosh, ich gewähnt der Avnet, was sie gemacht geworden für Shatnez. That amongst the garments of the Kohanim that they wore when they did the Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash, so one of them was the Avnet, the Gartel, and that was made of Shatnez. That means that Shatnez was allowed when they did the Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. Davon verstehen, we have to understand like this. There are three types of Klayim. Klayim is a general expression about the Isur, the prohibition of mixing two things together. And we find three things which fall into the category of Klayim. The Karka, the Beheme Begodim. This is a lotion from the Rabbeinu Bechai. And he says we have Klayim by the ground, we have Klayim by animals, and we have Klayim by garments. Like the Torah writes them all in one continuation. It says in the Torah like this. It says, Leisizra karmacho kelayim, do not plant in your vineyard kilayim, which means mix vines, grapes, with another type of fruit. Then the pasuk continues, Leisachreish, Beshever chamer yardov, do not plow a field using an ox and a donkey together. Really what it means is you can't crossbreed them, but the pasuk uses a lashon, don't even plow with them together. And then it says, Leisilba shatnez. And after that it says, do not dress shatnez. So the Torah puts all the three categories together. In Parsha K'dashim we find the same thing. The pasuk says, your animals you shall not crossbreed klayim, mixing two kinds. And it continues, don't plant klayim in your field. And the garment made of klayim, which shatnez, should not come upon you. The Rebbe does ask and the order he doesn't answer, just as we have to look into why the order of the things are different in the both parshas. In our parsha, first it mentions klayim of the field, then of the animals, and then of shatnez. In the Parsha K'dashim, it says first the animals, then the field, and then the shatnez. But that's not negated to the Sikha, that's the Chag the Rebbe says in Orah 9. But Lepel, we see that there are three kinds of kilayim. So the question is, my time, and what is the reason for klayim begodim atayra mate macht by Aveda b'migdosh or by tzitzis? The negei klayim of the garments, which means shatnez. The Torah allowed it when it came to doing the Aveda in the Beis HaMikdash. And the same thing we said before, the Torah allowed it by tzitzis, by the andere zwei mine klayim, but by the other two kinds of klayim, which is concerning mixing the animals and concerning mixing the plants. Gefindt man nicht, als das soll sein Mutter bei a Mitzvah oder bei Kotschim, bei Mikdash. We don't find that it's allowed when it comes to a Mitzvah or by Kotschim, by the Beis HaMikdash, etc., etc. Now the Rebbe says in order 10 that even though klayim is known as a chukah means it's something that has no reason. So what kind of question do we have? It's a chukah, it makes no sense. So you can't ask question. That's what a chukah is. The Rebbe says, see, that this only when it comes to the general mitzvah. It's a chukah. What kind of mitzvah? So klayim, shatnez is a chukah, the general. But we're talking about a certain detail that detail doesn't fit, because the detail should fit to the same categories in other things. So the question is, why is it that by klayim godim the Torah allowed it when it comes to holiness, and by the other two not? And the Rebbe says in Orah 11 that when it comes to the Mikdash, we could give a different answer, and the Rebbe doesn't say why it's not good, but it's not such a good answer. But it's a Mikdash, the Torah said to do that. Just like we can't ask a question when it comes to Shchita, We know how you shecht. But by an eif, if you bring a korban, a bird, you do a different thing. You do it malikia. You do it with your nail. You cut through the neck, not the throat, but the neck. And you can't ask Kasha, why do you do that? Because in the Beis Hamikdash there are different dinim. So the same thing here. Maybe you could say that that's why by Leib Godim Torah allowed it, because of the Beis Hamikdash. But the Rebbe nevertheless asked the question. We should have an explanation why, when it comes to Leib Godim to Shatnas, the Torah allowed it in the Mikdash of Tzitzis, and the other two types of Klayim, the Torah did not allow it. I feel when it comes to a holy thing. Then the Rebbe continues. Besides these three types of Klayim, of mixtures that we said, there's another prohibition which is similar to the prohibition of Klayim, which is Basar v'cholov, not to mix milk and meat. This is Mavoyin and Svarim. It says in Svarim that Tama Yisuf from Basar v'cholov is Keseda Klayim. That the reason for the prohibition of milk and meat is like Klayim. It's like the secret of Klayim. Why? How? It means that Taruva is von zwei Minim, was jeder von sie, jeder von sich is Mutter. We're talking about something that we have two kinds. Each one on itself is allowed. When you mix them together, it's osir. So Basar v'cholov is similar also. Meat is mutter, milk is mutter. To mix them together is osir. So that's another category thing which is similar to the first three categories of Klayim. So it says in Mechilte, as I said, that there is a havaminem, which means a first thinking, a first idea that maybe milk and meat together in by korbanos, by mukdoshim would be mutter. And by darshan the posik, reishis tovi beis Hashem alekechem. But we darshan the posik. There's a posik in Mishpatim that says reishis, etc. You should bring bikurim to the Beis Hamikdash. And tovi beis Hashem alekechem says you should bring it to the house of Hashem. And right away the pasuk continues, do not cook a goat in its mother's milk, which is the pasuk which teaches us the prohibition of basar v'cholov. So from there the Mechilte learns out, he puts the words Tovi Beis Hashem Elekecha right together with Leisavashal Di, as if it's saying, as in Beis Hashem Elekecha, from basar v'cholov, that even in the house of Hashem, you're not allowed to have basar v'cholov, milk and meat together. So we have to have a special pasuk for it, which means that if not for the pasuk, we would have thought that basar v'cholov is allowed in the Beis Hamikdash. It comes out of three categories. By Kleib Godim Shatnus of the Torah Matir Gemach Kleib by Vedas Hamikdash, we say it as a Gehesen, Mitzvah Sitzes. By Shatnus, which is the Kleib of clothes, the Torah allowed Kleib in the Beis Hamikdash, and not only allowed, said that that's what we should do, because the garment of the Kohen, the way the Eibush said to make it, must have Kleib. The same thing by Tzitzis. So we have one category which is Shatnus is allowed in the Beis Hamikdash, by Tzitzis. Cholov is doakasal kadaitach, and this is Aimutim Hamikdoshim. Now, we learned up from Apostle as this is also. By milk and meat, there is a thought maybe it should be mutter, but the end is that we learn now from Apostle that it's forbidden. So we see it's taka forbidden, but there is a svara that mutter. So it's not like tzitzis. There it's taka mutter in the Beis Hamikdash or by tzitzis, by shatnez. But here there's a thought maybe it should be mutter, and it's not. Or by klaya behema, klaya karkin, lechatchilim takasai kasal kadaitach as his own zay mutter by mikdoshim. But by the mixture of the animals, klayim of behema, and also the mixture of the plants, there is not even a svara that it should be allowed in mikdoshim. And Order 19 the Rebbe says there's a din, korbanos miklayim. You're not allowed to bring korbanos from animals, which is a mixture. But of them, we don't even need anything to teach us. So we have three categories. For the Tzechas, and now we have to try to understand. The Bald as the Leib the Morten Surim hom themselves tegen. Taruvis v'shnei minim. Since all the categories before are the same idea, they have the same meaning, that there's a mixture of two kinds, that each one separately is mutter. But it's only awesome when they get together, but they're all in the same category. So why is there a difference concerning the Beis Hamikdash? That when it comes to shatnez, it's allowed in the Beis Hamikdash. Concerning basar v'cholov, there are thought maybe it should be mutter Beis Hamikdash, it's not. And by the climb of animals, and the climb of karka, of plants, there it's 100%. Also, there's not even a thought that maybe it's mutter Beis Hamikdash. What's the difference? If they're all the same idea, why is there this difference? That Ramban, the Rebbe says, we'll understand is based on the words of the Ramban. The Ramban writes, as Dafke ben Negei zu Levisha Shatnes werd der Monte Chazal, as Yitzhahora Vuma Seidel Mashivim Naleim, aber nicht ben Negei zu Klai Payme. He says, we find in Chazal, in Gemara, in Mechilt, in Tereskeanim, we find that there are certain things that the Goyim, the Yitzhahora and the Goyim, they bother Eden, claiming, what is this? It makes no sense. Why do you do it? But it only is brought concerning Shatnes. But concerning Klaya Beheme, that it's forbidden to mix two animals, to crossbreed them, that it doesn't mention, that the Goyim will complain. Why? Why shouldn't they complain? They're just the same. And there is Mavayr, he explains that those are their fire, but by Klaya Godim, by Shatnes, is the Tamaf Nisan Nelam. Because by Klaya Godim, by Shatnes, the reason it makes no sense, it's hidden. We don't know the reason. So they come and complain. That makes no sense. Why do you do it? Schenke bei Klaya Beheme, weil der ist a Klaya Karke, versteht man dem Tamayise. But concerning the mixture of animals and the mixture of plants, we understand. They don't complain because there is a reason for it. And he gives a reason why, by those, you're not allowed to mix. And it makes sense why. And he says why. Der Rebischer Vaschaffne Nivroim in an Eifen Azarot in die Tzmochim, weil Nefesh reingegeben dem Keich al Tulde, she yiskaimu aminun. When it comes to the animals and comes to the plants, the Eibishter created in such a way that he put into them the ability of growth, the ability of reproduce. And he wanted it to reproduce, as the Pasuk says, Lemineim. Each species should be the way it is. That's how he created it. The Rebbe, therefore, Vaneiner is Ma'arif Klayim. So therefore, if you mix Klayim, that means that it's Markiv Shnei the Pein Shnei Nezroim. If you mix two species of animals, or two kinds of plants, but then they will change. They will become a different species. They will change in their nature and they change in their shape. Since they draw from both, so that one that will come out when you have, let's say, two different animals, what will come out from them will be taking a nourishment from both, will be a new species. And the same thing with plants. Every seed that will come out will be a new species of a seed that is made up of both. So he's a meshane umachish uma'arve b'maaseh b'reishis. So obviously he's changing, he's weakening, mixing what Eibishter created. So the Ramban says there is a reason why you're not allowed. Eibishter made it in such a way. Now why you wanted that is a different thing. But Lepeil, after he created each mean for itself, he doesn't want that you should take a mean and change it to another mean. That he doesn't want. And das was the Teire zogt on nit nur behemtach le sarbia klayim, the reich le sachrish b'sheber chamer yachdav. By the Teire, even though the Teire says not only don't crossbreed, but the Teire also says don't plow with them together. So the chura has nothing to do with becoming a new mean. Is mipnei. That's not because that's the problem. The reason is mipnei shederech kol eved ad mosei lohovit samdud bevrefesechos, because the nature is that when you work on the field with animals, you bring them into one barn. The end will be that you will crossbreed them. So the Isser is crossbreeding, and to make sure it doesn't happen, the Torah said don't even plow with them together. But the bottom line, why is it also the Torah doesn't want that you should take these minim and make a new mean come out of it, which is not the mean that David created. And that makes sense when the gay mixing behemoths and the gay mixing plants. But concerning shatness, it's not like that. Shatness is not like that. Why not? So David says, it comes out as do achilik ikri zwischen klaya behemoth and klaya karka and klaya God. So we hear, according to this Ramban, we see a main difference between the mixture of behemoths and plants versus the mixture of shatnez, which is a mixture of tzemer, pishn, wood, and flax. How? By klaya behemoth, klaya karka is there erev in them, eichen dem keich hatulde von the shnei minim. By the animals, mixture of the animals, the mixture of the plants, what you're doing is you're mixing also in the ability of reproducing from the two kinds. Behind der eruv peilt in der eruv peilt in an iker. Is an etzemetzias. When you mix it, what you're doing is you're in the essence of the thing you are changing. In something major, you're making a change. You're making a mixture. You're making a new species come out with a mixture of both. The male does benigut zum sidre meisebrecious as his own zaylam. So it's against the way David created the world. That everything should be according to its mean. But by shatnez, which is the mixture in the garments, he says nit ken taruvis in the metzem hametzis from the summer pishnik. It's not that you mix the two and become a new species, a species that's a mixture of two. It's superficially mixed. She's nervous, but it is, you take a thread of flax and you take a thread of wool and you put it into the same garment, you mix it together. So you're not making a change in this reproduction, a change in the Metzias itself. It's a superficial, it's in place, a change in place in the beged. Even after you mix them together, they remain on themselves. Each one remains not like a new thing comes out of it. So much so that you could even separate them. If you want, you could take out the threads and you could separate them. So you never made it. You just can't have them together in the same place. So it's a mixture, a superficial mixture, where by the others, by the animals, by the plants, it's a mixture that makes a new species come out of them. So it's a mixture in their reproduction, in their growing. Lidem is moving for that we understand. As the Geder Taruvas and Boser Becholo is an Eifna Mamutza zwischen the zwei Efan Taruvas. So this, from that we understand. What about the other thing? We were talking before now about the animals and the plants, and then we're talking about the clothes. But we said there was another thing, Boser B'cholov. Where does Boser B'cholov fit in? We said by the animals, by the plants, it's a major mixture. You make a new thing. By the garments, there's no new thing at all. You just put them together. Where does Boser B'cholov? And I will understand that Boser B'cholov is an Eifna Mamutza zwischen zwei Efanim Terubas now. Mixing milk and meat is a mamutza, and in between the two categories. Why? The Terubas Boser B'cholov is nita azav yiklai behema. It's not Boser B'cholov mixing milk and meat is not like the mixture of the animals. Which affects the reproduction thing. It's the growth that will come for later generation. You're making a new species come out of that mixture. The Taruas of Boser B'cholov tutzichuf nit mer in their gashbezik and metzias by milk and meat. All that they're take mixed. They're mixed more than just having two threads next to each other. But their physical mitzias becomes a mix, now becomes a unit of a mixture of milk and meat, but there's nothing to do with the future. It doesn't make up a new species. So it's not a mixture that it affects the essence of the thing to become a new, make a new species, but it's also not like shatnez. Weil bei Shatnez ist es nicht genir of Gomer for the zwei minim, because by Shatnez, there's no mixture at all. A real mixture, that the two should become one, from the two meaning of tzemer pishtin of wool and flax. Mashenki by Boser B'cholov, but by milk and meat, idor der isum in atayra dafke when means they mavashal yachad. Midaraisa, when is Boser B'cholov if you cook it together? Und einer is nesen tam in dem zweiten, and one gives a taste in the other, so they do become one unit. But noch more, even more, I feel them in Torah lekula yema b'chelba mavik Boser B'cholov kol hayem. If you soak milk and meat together a whole day, since the din is that if you soak something for 24 hours, it's like it's cooked. So one gives a taste into the other. Even then, it's not forbidden from the Torah. Only it's forbidden only if it was cooked. The Boser B'cholov is only when you make from the two separate things, you make it into one Metzias, but das kommt dafke durch Bishel, it comes through Bishel. So on one hand, you make it into a new Metzias, but that's it. It's only its Metzias is new. The two things that you mixed are new, but it's not going to cause any further. There's nothing in their etzem that will create something further, which will be a new species. You could say this is the explanation, but das Reb Levi, in the opinion of Rabbi Levi in Gemara Chuln, that's the Halacha in Rambam, and the Shirk Azayis from Yisr Boser B'cholov is Eichvens is do Blaze Achotzi Zayis Boser V'chotzi Zayis Cholov Akazayis Meishneim. Rabbi Levi holds, and that's the Halacha, that when you say every Yisr is Osir, the real Yisr is only when it's a Kazayis. So one opinion is that in order to have the real Yisr of Boser B'cholov, you have to have a Kazayis of milk and a Kazayis of meat, and you mix them together. And Rabbi Levi says, and the Halacha is not, that it could be a half a Zayis from milk, half a zayis from meat, together it becomes one new unit, a unit of one kazayis. So it does make a unit. Weil the Shem Yisrael legt sich nicht auf den Boser Bazunder und den Chala Bazunder. Because when we say it's Osir, it's not the milk is Osir and the meat is Osir. So if you say the meat is Osir or the milk is Osir, So if you would say that the milk is osir and the meat is osir, so each iser needs a kazayis. So you have to have a kazayis of milk, kazayis of meat. That's not true, because the iser is not on the milk, the iser is not on the meat. The iser is together as one unit. That's why he says, "I aim at from basar v'cholov," as their one mitzvah is basar v'cholov. Ubemele, this shows that there is a new mitzvah it makes. That's why it's not mamish like shatnez. Shatnez, there's no new mitzvah. But on the other hand, it's not in the essence of what it is, the gabe growing, the gabe having what's going to come later. It's not like that. So it's not like this, not like that. It's not like the plant and the animals will become a new thing that's coming out of it. But it's not like shatnez either, because it is a new mitzvah. With the shatnez, it's not. It's just close in space. The threads are close in space, but they don't become one. Okay. Now, what the Rebbe just explained, he's going to explain now in a deeper way, according to Chassidus, in a deeper way. He says, "Yedu v'shteitim b'chai." We know what it says in the b'chai. Aderinya von Isser Klayim is nit nor ha'ir b'gashmias. That when we say there's a Isser of Klayim, the mixtures is not only a physical mixture of the two physical things. Was mizmar v'akeches al yenim. But it's also was mizmar v'akeches al yenim. It shows when you mix the two kinds here, Lamaila, everything has a source in Shemayim, in heaven and in the spiritual worlds. By mixing it down here, you're mixing the shadish, the root of these things, which are the keches el yenim. The klayim is chibur shnei ktzoves. You take two extremes, two sides. Shem shnei hofchim, the two opposites. Ein chiburim el yofer. And when Lamaila, when you mix the two things, it's no good. It doesn't work. And therefore, down here, the Torah asked it. So the Isser of mixing the different things that you're not allowed to mix is because you're mixing Lamaila, and Lamaila doesn't work, so the Torah asked it down here. That's concerning Klayim. But by Basar B'cholov, he also explains. Milk and meat is an example. It's a hint for different special things in the higher worlds. But the Taruvas and Basar B'cholov Lamata pale the mirvuv from the Vorem Aheim was called Echad Vechad. When you mix the milk and the meat down here, you cause a mixture of these same things the way they are Lamaila, where they have to be separate. And by you mixing them down here, then the shade, what happens up there, mixes together, and that's no good. And as we see, Lagabe Shatnez, the Semru Pishten, there is a Shever Chameir, Basar Chola, we've explained, Saib Lagabe Shatnez, which is woolen, flax, and Lagabe an ox, and the donkey, and also concerning milk, mixing milk and meat, Saib the Marambas of Chesed and Gvura. These two kinds hint, one is Chesed, one is Gvura. One is the meat of Chesed, kindness, one is the meat of strictness. Because eine Midas Hofchis, they are two opposite midas. And their father is Ein Chiburim El Yofer. That's why you can't mix them together. They're two opposites, so you can't mix them. So these things, the Mata down here, represent things Lamaila, and you can mix them together because the Maila, they don't work together. Pia now, based on what we said before in Siv Gimel, in the Mechilik zwischen Klayim Behem and Karka and Klayim Godim, we said the difference between the Klayim, the mixture of the animals, or the mixture of the plants, Legabe, the mixture of the garment, which is the shatnez, based on what we said before, Legabe down here, that by the case of the animals mixed, the mixture of animals and of the plants, you make up and you touch into their ability of reproducing, into their etzem, they change their etzem. Mashenka shatnez, there's no change in the etzem, it's just they're close to each other. So the same thing is understood as the mirvu from the keches al yenim from chesed and gvura. So when we said that essentially the Rabbi Chai says it's all the mixture of chesed and gvura was ein chibura meile yofe, that the chibur, the connection between chesed and gvura lamaila isn't good, and that's why it's not good down here. But we said there's a difference down here between those cases. Is do achilikikas zwischen the zwei sugim and al, but there is a b'nigas b'cholov. So therefore, even lamaila, there will be a difference. Just like lamata, we said there is a difference in the mixture between animals and plants versus the basar b'cholovim, we said, versus basar shatnez, mixture of shatnez. So in applying this to the spiritual source will also be a difference. What does that mean? Let us verstehen, we'll see the difference. We'll understand it by first answering another question. There's a very simple question. We said before, why can't you mix the thing? The Ben Chai says, because they're two opposites. Chesed and Gvura, they're two extremes. In Ruchnias, they don't mix, so they don't mix down here either. In other words, the mixture of Chesed and Gvura is no good. The question is, We learn other places that mixing two opposites, making it into one, is something special. Inyan HaSholem, it's making peace. The Torah, the whole Torah was given that we should make peace. We should combine two opposites. One of the main things of an Avedis of a person serving Hashem is they shouldn't have the midas, his attributes should not be firm. There should be a mixture. Like you shouldn't be fully chesed. You should have some gvura in it. You shouldn't be fully gvura. You should have some chesed. It's good to mix. Okay, you do the beer of Maimer Chazal. So now in the explanation when the Chacham tell us, says a person should always be soft like a reed and not hard, tough like a cedar tree. So Chassidus says, as a mensch hat midas, a person has midas, yes. Aber darf haben welche midas. Your midas should be soft, which means, what das meint, as jede mide geht an Ort zu der Mide Hofchis. Your midas should not be stiff. Stiff means chesed is full chesed, gvura is full gvura. It says no, you should be rach kikona. Your midas should be soft, that you should, if you're chesed, you should still have place for gvura. If you're gvura, you should have place for chesed. Well, derech hamavoy barambam, like it says in Rambam, as a derech yeshore mida beinu neshim b'chol day v'day. Rambam says there are different ways of doing things and different emotions and different attributes, and there are certain extremes. The best thing is not to be big, not to have an extreme. You should have the middle way, which is a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So it comes out that there's a mile to have the combination of two opposite things. Und da sagt man, der Isser von Klein besteht in dem, was mis ma'arev de midas v'chesed gvura. That the prohibition, why is Klein also, why is the mixture also? Because you're mixing two midas v'chesed gvura. Isn't it good? State of them, there be, so the explanation is written like this. Adiskala samidis in Kedusha, depends. Depends how the mixture of the midas is. If it's in a holy way, is al derech v'taruvas min b'minei. Then, even though they're opposites, essentially they're not opposites. In Kedusha, if Chesed is for the purpose of Kedusha and Gvura, so there's one common denominator that they have. They're all for one purpose. So they're like a mixture of two things, but it's like a mixture, min b'minei. You have one mean, if you mix two things, but each one is the same mean. So even though we're mixing two meaning, we're mixing Chesed and Gvura, but at the same time, it's really the same mean. Why? Because it's a Matzedek writes that all the things of Kedusha, whichever way it goes, is really one kind, one mean. It's the bittul and the giving yourself over to the Eibishter. So you do chesed because you give yourself over to the Eibishter. You do gvura. So the essence is they're both the same. They're all one nekuda of giving over to the Eibishter. Und der Farge findet man, as in Avedes Hashem, kennen sein beide Midas Hofchis, the chesed and gvura zusammen. That's why when it comes to serve Hashem, you could have the two Midas of chesed and gvura together. The steht in Sifri, it says in Sifri, ala posik v'haftas Hashem alakecha, it says in Sifri, you should love Hashem, your God. That's the posik. So the Sifri says, ein l'chava b'makim yira v'yira b'makim ave l'midas HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'lvad. You can't have love and fear at the same time. You can't have love when you have fear, and you can't have fear when you have love, but only when it comes to serve Hashem. Because the Torah says, v'haftas Hashem alakecha, you should love Hashem. Then there's another posik, Hashem alakecha tira, you should have fear of Hashem. There's two mitzvahs. How could you have both mitzvahs together? Comes to Kedusha, you could have them together. It's good that you're together. Even though they're two opposite midas, but then the kuda of both of them is the same. In Ninyone ha'elam, when it comes to world matters, what they're gathered from the elam was a filtzich hametzias by worldly things. It's not bittul, worldly things. When you have a midah, the midah is an entity for itself. Gashmias is a real metzias, not a bad metzias only, but it's a metzias. You could take a physical thing and you can make a mitzvah out of it because it's a real mitzias. So when you have a midah, since it's a mitzias, and chesed and gvura is opposite, and chesed is a mitzias, the mitzias of chesed and the mitzias of gvura clash. It's only together if there's a bittul that's on top of it, that it's all for Hashem. But if it's a mitzias, it's a mitzias with a teikif, very strongly. Nazat teikif is gitnit kanor for a zweite midah. So strong that it does not leave place for a second midah. Befrat midah hofch is certainly not an opposite midah. On the river, therefore, there when it comes to worldly matters, you can't have love in the place of fear and fear in the place of love, because love is a metzias dika love, fear is a metzias dika love, and they're opposites. They clash. Therefore, you can't have it. If you do have a mixture of two opposites in worldly matters, so you're mixing one kind with another kind, a different kind. And that mixing is no good because Lamaila it's no good. Unless they turn into one kind, even though they're not, they remain Ave and Yire. But if they turn into one, if they're both in Dusha, so they have this common denominator that allows them to mix together. So that's what Mashenkin in Kedusha, but Kedusha is in Yonah Bittel to Meibish. Kedusha, the union is to be bottled to Hashem. Seine the Midas Hofkis, Mechesed and Gvura, need be snagged as einer to the Zweite. So the Midas of Chesed and Gvura is not that they're clashing with each other. They're not that, but the contrary is ein Bemes Minecha, that's all one. They're Teichen, the union from beide Midas is einer. Und derselbe, Vedas Hashem. The contents of what the union of these both Midas is one. The same one. Serving Hashem. Al derech Chazal zogen that from Posek Eise Shalom im Reimov, like the Chazal tell us on the Posek where it says the Eibishter makes peace bim Reimov, in his heaven. What do you mean makes peace? Who's arguing there? In the heaven arguing? So it says yes. There's Michael is a Malach. Michael Sar Shamayim, he's the officer of the water. Gavriel is Sar Shalish, Gavriel of fire. And usually water and fire clash, but Lamaila, these two Malachim don't clash. Ve'ei Mechabim says that one doesn't extinguish the other. Why? If they're opposites, because they're standing in front of the Eibishter, feel as they need to make the take of him, it says. They don't feel the strength of their personal identity, personal mitzias. They only feel that they're messengers of Hashem. But so they're not contradicting. They're both the same. They're both shluchim of the Eibishter. And it's interesting, the Rebbe in Order 53 brings that we find in Rasha in the Borod, the hail in Mitzrayim, so it says there was water there and there was fire there. And last says it's saying Canaan was a shalom in him. To do the Eibishter's will, they made shalom. Two opposites became one. They came together, they made peace. Why? Because they're all for one goal of serving Hashem, so they could go together. And they still remain opposites. That's the whole point. They remain opposite. This is Gvura, this is Chesed, this is water, this is fire. And nevertheless, because they have this common denominator, they're bottled to the higher thing. So the Nakuda of theirs is not their entity, personally, but the higher entity. The Rebbe says, based on that, we'll understand the chilek zwischen the zwei sugim anal in klayim. This will explain the difference in the two categories of klayim, klaya beheme vekarka, the mixture of the animals or the mixture of the plants in the ground, and klaya b'godim, mixture of godim. Now I'm going to say, before we learn the next piece inside, I'm going to say the nekuda outside, because in the words it's hard to put in exactly what the Rebbe means, and it's not exactly clear, but this is basically what he says, and then I'll try to read it inside. It comes out like this, that the bottom line is like this. If you have two kinds and they change their tziyur, but the tziyur, the species it was before is changed, that's no good. We said before, the Eibishter wants, where he created every mean separately, so he wants every mean to be separately. And by mixing it, it turns into a new mean. That's no good, no matter what. Okay. Then, when it stays the original mean, we also have two things. Depends. If the two things have a contradiction, which means, let's go ahead and say, that means that if it's not in Kedusha, and they remain two means, so the problem of being a new mean, it's not, has no problem. But there's a problem that they contradict each other. And contradiction can be. In the Ruchnis, two opposites can be. So that's also no good. So there's two reasons possible why it should be no good. It could be no good because there's a new mean. No matter what, it's a new mean. You can't do that. The Eibishter doesn't want it. You could have one that stays the old mean, but nevertheless they contradict. That's no good either. Because if they contradict, there's an argument. So the Maila, they don't work together. Then you have a third category. When they stay in their own mean. But the contradiction that's there is taken away, is bottled. Then it's good. Then it becomes shalom. Like we said before, the contradiction goes away. Like we said before, by the Seyonim Shel Dusha, it's bottled to Hashem. So even though there is no problem that there is a new mean, because the new mean is not there, it didn't become a new mean. But if it's not a new mean, so they're contradicting. But if there's something there that takes away their feeling of their metzias, then it's okay. And that will be what the Rebbe is going to explain here. When you put together two opposites, two things opposites, then you can have two possibilities of the results, two opposite results. Actually, we explained before, there's three here, three afanim. But the Rebbe here brings the two. Number one could be mevatel zeir tziyurim hofkin v'seisrim, when you nullify the fact that they're contradicting. If they're not contradicting, they remain what they are, but they're not contradicting because they have a reason not to, because they have the common denominator. What happens? The result is shalom. You put them together, that's very good. You want to make shalom between the two opposites. But that's if there is a reason that they don't contradict. Then there's another way, that when you put them together and each one remains its own entity, and there's nothing there that takes away the contradiction, it becomes an argument. So that's no good. That means that in the first way that the Rebbe read here is when you're mavatal the tziyur, but the Rebbe just gave the example when there is no contradiction, so the sholem. But that same thing, there's a second detail in the first one, that there could be that they still keep their mitzvah, so there's no problem of them becoming a new entity, but they're still contradicting. So that the Rebbe doesn't bring here. I don't know why. So he starts by saying that you take away the contradiction, even though they're two entities, but you take away the contradiction because they lose that mitzvah. That's okay. That's very good. That's sholem. If, as Rebbe says here, if they remain with their identity and there's a contradiction between them because the mitzvah counts, then it's a problem. Then you're not allowed to do it because then there is machlokes. And based on this, Rebbe says, these two ways can be in the two categories of klayim. We'll have to see in which two categories it means. He explains it like this. By klaya behem klaya karka, when the mixture of the animals and the mixture of the plants of the ground, but the mator in them is medium zorim mishunim betilas. The purpose is to have new species come out, to give birth to new kinds, new species, different ones than in their birth. You want to make, through the mixture of these two, to make a new, different type of species. Is there chesorin in them? Irvuv? So the problem with this mixture is that in was durch them werden in his battle al zwei besondere minim. They become bottle take. But what happens now? I'll rephrase it. The fact that they're two separate minim become bottle. Before we had two separate minim, and each one had its own characteristics. Now what you're doing by mixing them, you want to take away those separate characteristics. You want to turn them into one. So then there's exact against the Eibishter's will. He created them, each one with its own being, its own meaning. And the Eibishter wanted they should say in their own, gather in their own, whatever way they're supposed to be in their own mission, etc., etc. So this is a problem. So if you mix by Behema and by Karka, you make a new mean. So what's the problem here? Why is that no good? The reason for this climb is because you're making a new mean, which is against what the Eibishter wants. You take away, you make a new species. That's the Eibishter doesn't want it. We said before that the moshel of the Malachim, Malachol and Gabriel, and the Eibishter makes peace. So what did we say? That even though they're opposites, but they still make peace. What's the pshat? Is neither Pirish as durch dem Bittel zum Melech HaKadosh Baruch Hu and this battle the besondere Tafkidim from Malach Chol and Gabriel. Doesn't mean that because they're in front of the king, in front of the Eibishter, so their own personal function is nullified. Sar Shamayim, Sar Shalesh. The fact that he's water, he's fire, it's nullified. That's not what he means. Dos Vol given Hepekros Tavel. That's against what the Eibishter. That's not the Eibishter made him. He wants him to be Sar Shamayim. He wants him to be Sar Shalesh. So what's there? Everyone stays with his job. Nevertheless, it's sholem and it's good, the mixture. They don't extinguish each other because they're bottled to the Eibishter. But what the Rebbe is trying to bring out from this, we see that to the mavatal, the mean, the species that it is different than it was originally when the Eibishter made it, that's no good. So that's the problem of mixture of behemoths, a mixture of plants. By the mixture of the garment, by shatness, it's also a problem. You're not allowed to do it. It's an opposite problem. The bal that semer and the patients blind since here they remain. They don't lose their entity. It's not like by the behemoths where it becomes a new species. Each one is a separate species. Like we said before, the thread of wool and the thread of linen remain that way. They're just, the Eibush doesn't want them to be together. Should put them very close. So they remain in the Mitzias. And therefore, on the number one, the Keches al Yene was in Zay Zayin doch Shnei Hofchen Chesed. And now look, they remain who they are, and one is chesed and one is gura. So they're opposites. And the second thing, and we're not talking about holy things. We're talking about worldly things. And what's by worldly things? There is no bittel there that is bottled to some higher source, but mainly there's a common denominator. So what happens by the begodim? You have tzemer, you have pishtim, and they're separate entities, and they remain separate. That part is not bad, but they're opposites, and they can't get together. And there's nothing to make it to take away that opposition that they have. So the mixture is a mixture of two meaning, and that is no good. So it's not like we said before. We said before by behemoth and the plants, there the problem is because it becomes a new species altogether. It loses their original entity. That's no good. Here it doesn't lose them. Adarabe, the wool remains wool, and the pishtan remains pishtan. Elamai, the problem is that they're two separate entities that clash. So what comes out the result of their mixture? It's no good. As we said before, that when you have two midas, they're opposites. To put them together is no good unless it has to do with kedushim, because then it's not really opposite. But by the regular case of shatnez, they are emetzias and they're two opposites. So that's why it's no good. And that's the difference between the klaya behema and klaya karka, which over there the problem is one problem, which is a problem that their new entity becomes, which is against what Abisha wants. By the shatnez is another problem, that they stay their entity, but it's an entity that clashes. And if it clashes, it's also a now we could explain the difference in the three things, in the three categories, that by behemoth and by plants, it's also even in the mikdash. In the gay shatnez, it's mutter in the mikdash about tzitzis, and then by bosar b'cholov, there's a svara that it should be mutter in the mikdash too. The pale, it's not. What's the difference? It's like this. The time from had to climb from tzitzis, nazaya b'shayches la'avedas hamikdash. The reason why there is a heter, you're allowed to have this shatnez in tzitzis or shatnez in the Beis Hamikdash, is while in an inyan from mitzvah v'kedusha, midas hakadosh baruch hu tut sich auf durch ivru v'shnei hofchim. When it comes, that when it comes to holy things, we said before, and you have two opposites, but if the two opposites are part of Avedas Hashem, they have the common denominator that they're bottled to Hashem. So even though they're two opposites, but it's not a contradiction, because they're really one, like we said before. So when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, comes to the mitzvah of tzitzis, and these are two entities, so the problem of them losing their mean and they didn't want it doesn't apply because the mean stays. So what's the problem here? That they contradict. But since it's a holy thing, there's no contradiction, because even if they're opposites, they're all the MS1. But by Medvar Mamurin, when do we say that the Kedusha makes it into one? In Azasu Klein, with the ever firt period machlekes. It's only in a case when the mixture is not the problem of losing your entity. The problem is that is a machlekes. There's a contradiction here. But there chasor in the shayach by davar mitzvah dusha. So this problem doesn't apply. If it's an initial dusha, there is no contradiction, because they both have a common denominator in one. But in azasu klayim, with an irvuv is mavatal b'neiim. But in any those things, that the reason of klayim, why is it osir? Because it destroys, it nullifies the specific species that the Eibishter made it, which is the sidrei abriya, the Eibishter created it, is kenafkanin in it. Makes no difference if it's a worldly thing or kedusha. In other words, the fact that it's a dovish kedusha will not change the fact that you change the mean. That doesn't help. Whichever way, as much as a kedusha, but you're changing the mean. You're not allowed to change the mean. But the other thing, when it comes to shatnez, you didn't change the mean. The only problem is that it contradicts. So if there's a way that it doesn't contradict, it's okay. In the Mikdash, it doesn't contradict, because really each one, as much as it's the opposite, it's really not that, because they're all for one purpose. But when it comes to the problem of the way it's by Klai Behemim, Klai Karka, which the problem is that you're losing or you're changing the mean, makes no difference if it's in the Beis Hamikdash. When the fire by Klai Behemim, Klai Karka, so there was not even a thought that Klaim of animals and Klaim of plants should be muted in the Mikdash. Why should it change? You're still taking away, making a new mean. A new mean they didn't want. What's about Boser B'Cholov? Tafke by Boser B'Cholov. Here, Boser B'Cholov, we said before, is in between. Yes, Shmokim Leib, and as I heard some Sukvim Leib, Godim Knasi Beis. We said before, it's possible that it's close to the Shatnez. Because even by Boser B'Cholov, the mixture did not affect that there should be a reproduction of something new. Nothing will happen new. So since it seems like to a certain degree, it's like Shatnez, and by Shatnez we said, it's mutter if there is a dover shebekdusha, it's mutter. Is do asal kedait, das is ein mutter b'mekdosh, and the Shatnez b'bigdikune. So therefore, there is a thought, there is a possibility that Boser B'Cholov in the base of should be mutter, because the problem there is similar to Shatnez. And since the problem is only that they contradict, but if it's in a holy matter, it doesn't contradict. So Bisabik, they shouldn't contradict also Boser B'Cholov. Or the maskon is, but the end is as Beis Hashem alekecha leisav ashlan. Even when it comes to the house of Hashem, you cannot mix milk and meat. Why? Because the gather from Boser B'Cholov is kenalbas meshafta mitzias chadosha. Because after all, we said before, it's stuck a little bit like shatnez, but to a certain degree, it's like the others, like behemoths and plants. The difference is over there, a new thing will come out. But in one way, this is like them. It becomes a new metzias. As is bedemitz and sukum fly akerem, similar to the category of the mixture of the animals. But derei from tarubis is also reivah. If it's a mixture of these two, it becomes a new metzias. So their thought was, even though it becomes a new metzias, but not essentially, nothing new will come out of it. But L'Peil, it's not like them. The Pasuk teaches us that sof kosov, after all, it becomes a new metzias. It's already no good. The Eibusher wanted each species should be clear. It's a species. Here you mix the two, so there's no more species of milk and meat, separately milk and meat. But Meilet is tak also. But we understand why there was a havamim. I thought that might be mutter nebis hamikdash. And the Rabbi says, "Shteitim b'chai." Says Rabbi b'chai as beise as man losid lobe. When Mashiach will come in the future, yisem Boser B'Cholov mutter. Boser B'Cholov will be allowed. Now there is like findt man at the Malachim by Avram and gigas Boser B'Cholov. By the Malachim came to Avram, they ate milk and meat. So milk and meat will become mutter again. And in the order 58, the Rebbe just, by the way, just notes that there's another thing we find that will become mutter, and that's chazer. And it's known that there's a loshon osit chazer l'toyer, that in the future chazer will become mutter. And the Rebbe in the ha'ora and the ha'ora, in the Shul Agilim we call it, and this ha'ora has a whole thing. Where does it say this, that chazer will become mutter? And the Rebbe says it then that there's somebody who writes in the Sefer that this whole Maimer Chazal doesn't exist. And the Rebbe brings many Maimer sources for this Maimer Chazal B'Chazer. But it's not Ninkei Tarinyan here. It's just by the way the Rebbe brings it. Like a lot of times, the orders are things by the way. But what does it say there that when Mashiach will come, Boser B'Cholov will come mutter? Why? Based on what we said before, we could explain it. So the Geret Friya, we spoke before, is Sik Daled. Ados was Boser B'Cholov et Amatzias Chadosh is Norben Gezer Geshem Echemer. We said that even though Boser B'Cholov Yimikshim becomes one new entity of Boser B'Cholov, it becomes a new Metzias, but it's only concerning their physical being. But it doesn't affect the inner part, the keiches. By the mixture of the fruit and the mixture of the animals, their keich and heilode, the keich of reproducing, their essence is changed to make a new metzias. Here, that doesn't affect that deep. It doesn't go that deep. It just becomes a new physical metzias. But it doesn't affect the pnimis of metzias, the inner part of the metzias. The funif hashtanik and the senem negay, the keiches al yenim, was in Boser B'Cholov. So since we said the Boser B'Cholov down here represents the mixture of the higher keiches, the higher keiches are not connected to the physical part. The higher keiches lamailo, the root, so to speak, the shadish of these things, that's all connected to the pnimis of the mitzias. So according to that is the taruves al derech klayib godim. So now Boser B'Cholov is oser, but when Mashiach will come, it'll become mutter. Because in essence, it's like klayim godim. It's the essence like shatnez. Because be'emes, it's only physically it becomes a new mitzias. But yeder keich from light is mitzias. By the godim shatnez, every keich, the wool or the linen are separate mitzias. By Boser B'Cholov, in essence, it is a separate mitzias still. There's two mitzias in here. Just physically it becomes one. There's the difference between nowadays and that time, meaning when Mashiach will come. In Elam Hazef was man hazeh, zet man nur im Geshem Echem from Yeder Gashmi, from Yeden Dover Gashmi. Nowadays, when we look at something, we just see the mitzias of the physicality of it. The Balda ben Ged im Geshem Echem Adover is from the Meir Boser B'Cholov geworden Mitzias Chadosh. And since looking at it from the physicality of it, the mixture of milk and meat, turn it into a new mitzias in Gashmias. So therefore, according to the dinim of the Torah, the Torah was given down here. Torah was given in this world. The Torah is given to people that are physicality, they have a body. So in this case, it's also like mixture of behemoths. It's also when it comes to mitzvah, because from the physical, superficial part, it's like the other mixture. And we said before that why is it taka also even in the Beis Hamikdash? Because after all, looking at it, it's a new mitzias. So the old mitzias fell off, and that's no good. David doesn't want the old mitzias to fall off. The mean should say, but that's only from the physical part. In the future, when the promise of Hashem will become a kuyum, and it'll happen that what? That'll Hashem, the covenant of Hashem, glory of Hashem will be revealed. Every flesh will see that everything is from the words of Hashem. We will see, and we'll look at every gashmasika thing. We will see not the gashmas of it, the physicality of it. We will see the dvar Hashem, the words of Hashem, the spirituality that's there, through which it was created. That's the pi Hashem dibir. That's the words of Hashem. That's what we will see. Pi Hashem dibir. But it's mahava machayim makayim yad, which creates and gives life and existence to every creature. So whenever we will look at anything, we will not look at them and see as gashmi. We will look at the pnimius. So when we will look at milk and meat together, we'll see the true mitzias. And what's the true mitzias? The dvar avayim, the keiches al yanim, the words of Hashem, which means the higher keiches that are there. And they don't become bottle. They only become bottle. I mean, it doesn't. The mitzias doesn't become bottle. Only the mitzias of each one separately. Boser become bottle from the gashmizik part. The pnimis, they're not one. The pnimis, they're not bottle. So the pnimis, they remain separately. So they don't have the problem of becoming one, because we will see deeper in it. And since the world will become a holy world, when it's a holy world, then it's the opposite. That Eruv from Boser B'Cholov, which is Chesed Gvur and Kedusha, we said before in the higher worlds, not in the higher, we said before when it's a Dover Shebekdusha, then it's mutter, because if it's Dover Shebekdusha, the opposites don't matter, as long as they stay opposites. So Boser B'Cholov really stayed opposites. We just look at it and we see it as one mitzias, but really bad if they stayed opposite. So L'osid Love, when the whole world will become Kedusha, and we will see how this is all from Hashem, so we see how they are still separate mitzias, but in the mitzias of Kedusha, because the whole world will become Kedusha. Therefore, Boser B'Cholov will become mutter L'osid Love.